Okay, today's class is sponsored Le'iloi Nishmas Eliezer Leib Ben Yitzchak. May his neshama have an aliyah from the learning that we do.
Amen. Okay, great. Okay, so I'll tell you, I don't know if I assume my daughter is going to get on at a certain point, but I don't know for sure. Okay, so basically, this is a little bit of a different class that I've been giving because it's really not, I see Tova's on. It's really not a class of hashkafa, even though there will be hashkafa here, but hashkafa is not the point of the class. It's not musar, it's not hashkafa. The point of the class is really to, it's because basically I noticed that the women that have signed up for Midrash Rachel, who are from birth, those women, I noticed a few things about them. They're from birth, they went to Beis Yaakov. Some of them went to seminary afterwards. Some of them didn't go to seminary and only came to Rosh Rachel after they finished college or university. So it's really hard to know why they were the way they were. But what I noticed that was in common was, actually I wrote it down over here, there are three things that they have in common. One is that their reading and translation is a bit sloppy, okay? And two, getting the commentary step by step is a problem. In other words, they view the commentary as all one thing, right? A little bit of a cholent, and they just keep reading and reading. But look, what was he bothered with here? What is he answering here? What does he bother with here now, right? And in many of the cases, he's not just bothered with one thing. He's bothered with more than one thing, the commentary. And we have to stop and figure out at this point, what is he bothered with? Sometimes you have to read the whole commentary and then go back and see what he was bothered with. But at the end of the day, many of the commentaries, including Rashi, and we know Rashi is always bothered with something, even if he doesn't bring the question, but he's, as we say in Yiddish, there's a Yiddish expression, it's bavorning the question, right? It's like by answering it the way Rashi answers, we know what the question was, or we figure out what the question was, right? It's like sort of the warning you to the question. Now, so that's 2. 3, there's subtleties in the differences between Rishonim. Now, sometimes they're not so subtle. And if you don't get them, then we're in trouble. But even when sometimes they look the same, there's sometimes subtleties that show that they're somewhat different. Sometimes the subtleties would be the way they read the text. Sometimes the subtleties would be the way they think about the text. But that's basically the idea why I found that this type of class is helpful. The women that are going to join this class, there's going to be a little bit of a problem because everybody is at a different level. They're not all exactly at the same level. And therefore, I need to get sort of feedback. What is given, right? What should I take as, as just, it's given that they understand this and I shouldn't really go into it, and other things I should go into. So I'm going to try today to not take anything for granted. But at a certain point, if I get feedback that, no, this was too easy, I will then take certain things for granted, okay? But that's really the idea of the course. Now, with regard to the Rishonim, I'm going to, number one, show you, like I said, the difference between what 2 Rishonim say, right? And then also, I'm going to point out from time to time, what does this Rishon want in general? Meaning, why did he write what he wrote? Why did he write the commentary? Not just the particular commentary, but his whole commentary. Why did the Radak write his commentary? Why did Rashi write his commentary? What were their purposes here? What did they try to do? What were they trying to address, okay, by the commentaries? And we will see that there's actually differences between them, okay? So that's the first thing. Let's now maybe go into, I gave you over here a Rashi and an Ibn Ezra and a Ramban. Now, I'm positive we'll get to the Rashi and Ibn Ezra. I'm not positive we'll get to the Ramban. But the first thing we really should do is, get the simple pshat, then read the Rashi, and then read the Ibn Ezra. and see. It doesn't matter if I read the Ibn Ezra first or the Rashi first. It doesn't really matter. But to first get the simple pshat in the text, it's a very simple pasuk. Pasuk lamed chap lamed ches pasuk ches in Shmos. Vayas eis hakiyor nechoshes ve'eis kano nechoshes b'maros hatzovas asher tzovu pesach oel moed. And he made the person making the Mishkan made the sink of copper, and he made the stand, right, of copper, and he made it with the mirrors of the tzovos, which the word tzava means, army, or the ones lining up, asher tzavu pesach oel moed, that lined up at the opening of Oel Moed. Okay, I'm not going to go into now there was really no Oel Moed yet there. It was, Moshe was first building it now. So some people learn it. We'll see it. Maybe, I don't remember if it's Rashi, the Ibn Ezra, or others. The Ramban, I think, says it that Oel Moed means Oel Moshe, because that was the Oel Moed where they used to meet before the Mishkan. But okay, let's not go into that. The most important part is the Pashup Shot here in the text. The first part of the text is they made a kiyor nechoshes and they made a kano nechoshes, the sink and the stand, using the mirrors of the tzovos. Okay, so it seems on the simple level they used the mirrors of the people who lined up, the tzovos, which is the women that lined up at the opening of the Oel Moed. Okay, now we're going to see that Rashi and the Ibn Ezra, and even the Ramban to an extent, but certainly Rashi and the Ibn Ezra, do not accept the Pashup Shot here in the text. And the question is, why do they not accept the Pashup Shot in the text, which I just now translated? Okay, and we'll see that they are really bothered with similar things, but they take different approaches. Okay, so let's first begin maybe with start with Ibn Ezra. V'tamat sovos. Now, first thing is, the word tam does not mean in the Ibn Ezra, in the Ramban, in the Radak, 90% of the time it does not mean the reason. Okay, the reason of the tzovos. It means the understanding of the tzovos, right? Tam is the understanding of the word hatzovos. What is the understanding of that? Okay, now once in a while it means reason, but generally speaking, we'll see more and more that it means the understanding. Ki mishpat kol anashim lis yapos liros pneihem b'chol boker b'maros nechoches oschuches l'taken ha'peirim shal rashem. Because the way, mishpat is another word for the way of the women. This was the custom of the women to make themselves, their faces beautiful every morning. B'maros nechoshes oschuches, in the mirrors of copper or mirrors of glass. L'taken ha'peirim shal rashem. In order to fix the headdresses, not the hairdresses, but the headdresses on their heads. Heiman Iskorim b'Sefer Yeshaya. Those are the ones that are mentioned in Sefer Yeshaya. Yeshaya mentions a bunch of different ornaments that the women wore. He talks about headdresses, right? He talks about mirrors actually also. But that's what the Ibn Ezra says that's what he's referring to. So in other words, the Ibn Ezra is explaining that the mirrors are basically the mirrors that the women use to make themselves beautiful, and that's an old custom that women used mirrors to make themselves beautiful. It's already in biblical times, it would seem, that the women use this. Okay, now v'hinei. Oh, excuse me, I skipped. Minhag Yisrael hayak minhag Yishmol ad hayom, because the minhag of the Jewish people is like the minhag of the Arabs until this day. The custom is like the Arabs, and until this day means in the Ibn Ezra's time. And of course, we have to say that Ibn Ezra was a traveler. He grew up in Spain, but he traveled all over the known world, including Israel and the Middle East. And he takes a lot of note of the Arabs of that time, right? And others do, by the way, also. when it comes to poskening how much hair a woman has to cover, which we're not going to go into right now, but Ramosha al-Shaker in the 1500s, late 1400s, 1500s, says, well, take a look how much the Arab women are covering. That's probably how much the Jewish women used to cover. So they view the Arab women as a guideline for modesty, right? And they used to use mirrors too, the Arab women. And he says that's what the minhag was till this day, till the day of Ibn Ezra, which is, of course, the 12th century. Behine, okay? Now he says a chiddush. And a lot of times the word vehine is an introduction to a chiddush. We're going to see this many, many times. Vehine. Hayu b'Yisrael nashim ovdos Hashem shesaru mitavat zeh ha'olam. There were women in Israel that were serving God that removed themselves from the lustings of the world, right? The desires of the world. V'nosnu maroseim nidava, and they gave them mirrors as a present to the Mishkan. Ki ein lehem tzorach od lisyapos, because they don't need it anymore to be beautiful. Why not? Because they were ovdos Hashem, and they were removing themselves from tavos ha'olam, from the desires of the world. So part of the looking good the Ibn Ezra makes for an assumption is because that's the way in the world the women make themselves beautiful. Okay? Rak ba'os yom yom el pesach ha'oel moed. They come every day to the opening of the Ohel Moed litpalel, to daven, v'lishmoa divrei hamitzvos, and to hear the words of the mitzvos. Okay, so these women who removed themselves from the pleasures of the world, what did they used to do? They used to come and stand here and daven, and also listen to mitzvos, which sounds like they daven, and they also learn Torah, which is interesting, because here you see that the Ibn Ezra held that in biblical times the women were already listening to the mitzvos and studying Torah. V'zeu asher tzavu pesach oel moed, and this is what it means that they stood lined up at the opening of Ohel Moed, ki hayu rabos, because there were many. Okay, so here's the Ibn Ezra starts off by saying very simply that the women, what mirrors were given? The mirrors of the women that they used to make themselves beautiful. Now, of course, there's an obvious question here. Well, how are you going to make yourself beautiful if you give away your mirror? Right? That's the obvious question, correct? That one has to ask, right? Why were they giving up their mirrors? It seems like these are women who lined up, and the Pashup shot is to line up to give you mirrors, right? So, of course, the question is, one second. So the question is, why would you line up to give your mirror if you need it for looking beautiful? Comes along the Ibn Ezra with a chiddush that these women didn't need to make themselves beautiful anymore because they gave up their, the material life, and therefore they didn't need the mirrors anymore. Okay. Now, so what is Ibn Ezra here bothered with? Actually, what is he bothered with? Okay, number one, why would they give away their mirrors? So he has a very good explanation, right? But that's a made-up explanation. I mean, very creative, but made up. I mean, where does he see this in the text, right? Where do you see in the text that the women did this, right? So we have to begin to analyze the text, right? And there's an obvious question in the text over here. The obvious question is, it says, "B'maros hatzovos," right? What does that mean, maros hatzovos? It should mean maros hanoshim. Asher tzovu pesachom. What's the maros hatzovos, right? Comes along Ibn Ezra, and he says, Sovos were women who lined up to daven. Now, the pshat is not that they lined up to give away their mirrors, right? The pshat is they lined up to daven, a whole new pshat in the text. Because the Pashup pshat is they lined up to give away their mirrors. But he has a problem. Why would a woman do that? His answer is, no, they gave away their mirrors because they didn't need it anymore. So what does Sovos mean? Sovos means that now, right, they're coming to the Mishkan, they're lining up to the Mishkan to be in Ohel Moed, right? Sovos asher tzovu Pesach Ohel Moed. They didn't come to give away the mirrors. That's not why they came. They came to daven. They came to hear the Torah. And that's why they gave up their mirrors. So it's saying the maros of the women who came to daven, not the maros of the women who got online to give away their mirrors. The maros that the women who came to daven and learn, those are the maros that they got. They didn't get all the maros, by the way. There were plenty of women who said, over my dead body, right? You're not going to get my mirror, right? Who are the people who were giving the mirrors? The women who came to daven. Because the minute you came to daven, meaning you were there all the time to daven, or you were there all the time to learn, that means you removed yourself from the pleasures of this world, the material of this world. And now, so the word Sovos led the Ibn Ezra to say that Sovos, Asher Tzovu Pesach Ohel Moed, and led him to mean that, why are you coming to Ohel Moed? Go give your mirrors away to, the Gabbai, coming to Ohel Moed. That means that obviously you're coming for something else, but you didn't need your mirrors anymore. So Sovos is not going back on the mirrors. There's nothing to do with the mirrors. The mirrors were given away by these women who was very special women who were, I would say, probably not the majority of women, even though it says Asher Tzavu, and Ibn Ezra says there were many. And why does he point out there were many? Because Asher Tzavu, right? It says that they were like a tzava. They were like an army of women. So he says there were many, right? That's a chiddush of Ibn Ezra, meaning he himself was looking at it. Wow, a lot of women gave up their material pleasures in order to make sure that they were on a high level and they were doing what you need to do. Okay, that is Ibn Ezra. Okay. Now, let's take a look at Rashi. B'maros Hatzovos. Benos Yisrael hayu biyadam maros sheros behem kishehem miskashtos. The Benos Yisrael, Jewish women, were in their hands mirrors that they saw them in them when they mitkashtot means to a kishut is to where they beautify yourself, where they make themselves beautiful. Okay. Va'af otam lo ikvu melahavi linidvas hamishkan. And even these they didn't hold back to bring to the nidvas to give as a gift for the Mishkan. Okay. So let's first start by asking, is Rashi and the Ibn Ezra, are they referring to the same mirrors? Same mirrors? What do you think? Yes, the mirrors that women use, right? Doesn't say in the text, it says Maros Hatzovos, but both of them are learning the same thing. These are mirrors that were used basically for the woman making herself beautiful, something more materialistic. That's what they were used, and that's the mirrors that they got. No disagreement. Question?
Is he including really all the Benos Yisrael, or is it also intended to mean?
That's a good question. Does he mean all Benos Yisrael? We're going to see from the rest of the Rashi that it isn't all Benos Yisrael. It may be a different type of woman than Ibn Ezra, but it's not all Benos Yisrael. V'af otam lo ikvu. Even those they didn't hold back. Now Rashi says v'af, right? Rashi should have just said v'lo ikvun otam, right? Not what's even these, right? So that's an interesting question. Why Rashi says that means there were other things that they also gave, okay? And there were. Okay, v'haya mo'es Moshe bahem mipnei shasuyim liyetzer hara. And Moshe Rabbeinu right, was he rejected them because they were made for the Yetzer Hara. Okay, they were made for the Yetzer Hara in the sense of, I mean, it wasn't like, it's merely means, doesn't mean the women had a big Yetzer Hara or big Yetzer Hara than the men, but it means that the idea of beautifying oneself, even though that's something that is mekubal, it's not like the Torah doesn't look at it as something negative, it looks at something positive, but it is something material, right? Right? So it is something superficial, right? But it's something superficial that's completely legal. So he says, but Moshe rejected them, right? They're made for the Yetzer Hara. Okay. Now, Rashi all of a sudden came from left field, right? Well, how did Moshe get into this pasuk? It doesn't say a word about Moshe rejecting them, right? So Rashi seems to have made up. I mean, again, we know that Rashi basically brings you Chazal. And of course, this is definitely a Chazal. And Rashi is trying to fit it in as much we'll see into the pasuk, or we'll have to see how Rashi tries to fit it into the pasuk, right? Because that's what Rashi's approach always is. I'm going to make you think that the Chazal is pshat, so you're going to come home to your mom and your dad and tell them what you learned in Chumash today. And even though it's a midrash, they're going to learn it as pshat. Okay, that's the success of Rashi always, that, the kids come home and they all think Rashi is actually part of the text. So Rashi was very successful with that. Okay, but it seems very strange that Rashi brings Moshe in here. Like, is this just a creative part of Chazal, just to give us a vort, or there's something in the text over here? Okay, so let's see what Rashi says over here. But the question has to be raised. You're not allowed to just be happy with, Rashi brings it in text because Chazal bring it, and they want to give us a moral message. So they took a giant step, which sometimes they do. But even with the giant step, there has to be something in the text that leads you to it. Okay? Now, Amalek Kadosh Baruch Hu. Kadosh Baruch Hu said to Moshe, so we got this whole conference that they're having. Moshe Rabbeinu said, you can't give me these mirrors. I'm not going to accept them. They're made for, the Yetzer Hara. God says to Moshe, Kabel, accept them. Ki elu chavivim alai min hakol. They are more dear to me than anything else. Shal yedeim hemidu hanashim tzvaos rabos b'mitzrayim. Because through them, the women established much armies in Egypt. What does that mean? Very strange thing. Women are, now this, every Beis Yaakov girl knows this part of the Rashi. There's no question about it, right? Okay. When their husbands were tired in the service, in being servitude, the difficult servitude, they would bring them food and drink and feed them. Okay, that's either. Now every Beis Yaakov knows what's about to come, right? We all know that exactly, right? So let's see if we can't learn something new that you may not have seen in Beis Yaakov. Okay, v'notlam hamaros, and they took their mirrors along, which is interesting. They brought the mirrors along. V'chol achas roet atzmo imbala b'mareh, and every woman sees herself with her husband in the mirror, umishtadlo b'dvarim, and she entices him with words. Which words? Ani no'eh mimcha. I am prettier than you. I'm better looking than you, right? They're both looking in the mirror, right? And she's trying to get her husband, obviously over here, she's trying to entice her husband to be a little bit more like a husband and not like a slave, right? So she says, she starts playing around with the husband, right? It's a little like a foreplay, and she's trying to get him into the mood of being with her, right? And through this method of showing them the mirrors, of looking in the mirror together, right? They would, like it's almost like a selfie, right? Lidei tava, they would bring them to a desire. The husbands now, who were very tired to begin with and hungry, would now become become much more desired to the wives. And they would be intimate with them. Umis abros v'yoldo sham, and they would become pregnant and give birth there. It doesn't mean they stayed there for 9 months. It means they become pregnant there, and later on they gave birth there in order to avoid, obviously, if they gave birth to a boy, the boy getting killed. Shenema tachas atapuch orarticha. Like it says in Shurin, under the tree, I awakened you. Now, I'm not going to go into the pasuk now because it's a little bit controversial to learn this pasuk on, the guy's wife who's awakening his desire, right? I mean, that's dafka the way Rashi doesn't want you to learn Shir Hashirim, right? So it's a little controversial, but let's not go into that right now. But it is a very good pasuk because it says underneath the apple tree, I awakened your desire. Okay, the way the Chazal learned it's going on God, and in fact, underneath the apple tree is the Har Sinai, right? Couple of Har Kegigus, right? And that's how they got it. But I'm not going into now exactly. All of a sudden Rashi seems to change channels here or change his direction here. But okay, so we all know this idea, right? So the question, of course, is, okay, number one, Rashi's bothered with, right? What is Rashi bothered with over here? All of a sudden he brings in Moshe Rabbeinu, doesn't want to accept it. And Moshe Rabbeinu has a pretty good taina here, right? He says, like, wait a minute, we got a Mishkan here. We're building God a Mishkan. There should be nothing, this should have nothing to do with Gashmius. It should have nothing to do with material, right? So I think it's a pretty good question on Moshe's part, right? And furthermore, like, okay, God answers back, according to the Medrash, God answers back and says, these are more dear to me than anything else, right? Because through these, we established, right, tzvos rabos b'mitzrayim, okay? Now, what is Rashi bothered with in that he was able to bring this whole conversation between Moshe and God? By the way, obviously we paskin like God, and we use the mirrors, correct? So Moshe Rabbeinu had a good question, but God had a good answer. We'll have to see exactly what the answer is, okay? But what is Rashi seeing over here in the text that is strange? That he comes to this, right? What did Ibn Ezra see? He said it didn't. He didn't say it. It comes out from his pshat. Sovos means people who are coming to the Mishkan to daven. It does not go back on the mirrors, right? Because normal women would not bring their mirrors, right? So it must be going on these women and going on the davening and learning, right? Rashi, what does Rashi bother with over here? Probably the same question. Why doesn't it say B'maros hanashim asher tzovos? Oh my, maros hatzovos. Okay, the maros hatzovos. According to Rashi, what does tzovos mean? According to Ben Ezra, it means women davening, women learning, right? Women who gave up worldly pleasures, davening and learning. According to Rashi, what does tzovos mean? A whole different shot.
Women who created armies.
Women who created armies, okay? So Maros Hatzovos is like sort of a Poal Yotze, they didn't just stand there, but they created standards, right? They created armies, right? That's the way Rashi learns the idea, right? And in that Sovos, again, the same problem, right? We have this idea. Now, the minute you learn as women who created armies, right? The maros hatzovos, the maros that the mirrors that created armies, those are the mirrors that created armies, right? The minute you have that, automatically you understand what's going on over here. No, it's not such a big jump anymore, right? To say that, wait a minute, They're using the mirrors that created the armies. Who cares what the mirrors were used for, right? Who cares, right? They used the mirrors to be beautiful. And they gave them away, right? And Rashi says, even these, they didn't hold these back either, right? Which, like Rashi is saying, there's other things they didn't hold back, but even this, right? So Rashi's making a point over here that they parted with other things, which we know. They gave jewelry, right? We could check before, and you'll see to the Mishkan, they gave all sorts of jewelry. Some of it is mentioned by name, the different types of jewelry, right? And even this, they gave away, right? So this is like even a bigger chiddush. Okay, I give away my jewelry, but I got to make sure my hair my hair looks good, or my peirah looks good, or something, right? That I'm not going to give up, right? No, even these they gave up, right? And why did they give them up? According to Ibn Ezra, why did they give them up? Why did they give them up according to Ibn Ezra? They didn't need them anymore, correct? According to Rashi, Rashi doesn't tell you why they gave them up. Rashi just says, I want to tell you a chiddush that even the mirrors they gave up, right? And why did they give up? Doesn't say in Rashi why they gave it up. But they gave it up. They gave it up basically for the Mishkan, right? So the theme over here is not about the women giving up something, right? It's really more about the types. The text is not discussing that the women gave up the material pleasures and were by the Mishkan, right? The text is discussing what the mirrors were used for. Okay? According to Ben Ezra, the mirrors were used for to beautify yourself, right? According to Rashi, the mirrors were not only, obviously, were used for beautifying yourself, but they were at one point used for something else too. It had to do with beauty. It had to do with Gashmias. But what would we say it was really used for at that point when the woman was with her husband? What would we say? It was used for what? If we had to put it conceptually. Was it used for something material? Yes. But there's an extra something added over here. What's added over here?
There's a higher purpose.
A higher purpose. It was used materially, l'shem shamayim. Okay? Use material l'shem shamayim. That's not maros hatzovos. The maros that created armies, right? That gave birth to children in Egypt. That this was how the Jewish people were going to get out of Egypt because they saw a future. The men didn't see the future, right? You know that Yochevet's husband, right? Divorces her according to the Medrash, right? Rashi brings, right? Then he took her back. Amram takes her back, right? But they didn't see a future. But the women seem to have forced their husbands into a future, right? So they used the mirrors in order to, even though they used them in a way that had to do with material, that they were looking in the mirrors together with their husband and using it for intimacy purposes. But in that, there was one ingredient in the intimacy purposes that was the higher level, as we say, the higher level, or l'shem shamayim, right? Now, so now, according to the Ibn Ezra, in other words, Moshe Rabbeinu had a good question. He had a good question. How could you use these mirrors that were used for, according to Ibn Ezra, right? L'ros paneim b'chol boker, right? Lisyapos, right? How could you use that for a mishkan? Okay. So Rashi has one answer, and the question is, what would the Ibn Ezra answer if you would ask him? What would he answer? It's a good question that Rashi is not asking, but he's saying that Moshe Rabbeinu asked. Moshe Rabbeinu asked. He's putting to Moshe Rabbeinu asking it, and where does he get it from? The fact is, Maros Hatzovos. That's the answer to Moshe Rabbeinu, right? So then he's able to bring the question of Moshe Rabbeinu. Maros Hatzovos means, okay, the Maros that made. Why would the Torah tell me about armies being developed? Obviously, that's the whole chiddush here, that these mirrors were used for armies, right? And that's the answer to Moshe Rabbeinu, right? So now we could easily put in what was the question. Question was, should you use them? Now, the Ibn Ezra says, right, the women these are maros of women that rejected their mirrors, right? They rejected their mirrors, right? By the way, I mean, Elisheva, you asked, where did everybody bring these mirrors, right? So it could also be that, you know, it's only the married women that brought the mirrors. What's important over here is that they didn't reject the mirrors. They didn't reject the mirrors because of, you know, they didn't need them anymore. They were on this high level of, you know, this tzadekis that doesn't, you know, care about how she looks anymore. That's not why they brought them. Okay? Rashi doesn't go into why they brought them. They brought them, according to Rashi, the Pashup Pshat is out of the goodness of their heart. They needed mirrors in order to build a kiyar and a kano, in order to build a sink and the stand of the sink. So the women brought, right? And that was the Chiddush of Rashi, that even those they brought, you know, out of the goodness of their heart, kol nediv libo, right? That's what they brought, right? But the Torah stresses that they were the tzovos, right? That these mirrors created tzovos. So probably the women who created tzovos brought these mirrors. The young women, you know, the teenage women didn't give up their mirrors so fast, but the women who created the tzovos, they gave up their mirrors. You know, they're willing to give their mirrors too. And God said to Moshe Rabbeinu, that's okay. Okay, that you can use these mirrors, no problem. Okay, so now go back to the Ibn Ezra. Back to Ibn Ezra. What is the Ibn Ezra here saying? Okay, what makes the mirrors permitted? Does the Ibn Ezra feel like, what do you mean? What makes it permitted? What do I care if they used it for the way they look? That's not a problem. So they used it. Now they're using it for material, almost like exactly what we said before. Well, we're lifting it up to the next level, right? So now we're taking mirrors that we use, just like Rashi, right? I don't think that's what Ibn Ezra is saying. Ibn Ezra says clearly that the women gave up these mirrors, right? Those are the mirrors of the women standing there davening. They gave up their mirrors. They rejected the mirrors, right? The Ibn Ezra stresses the rejection of the mirrors in a very subtle, to make a very subtle point. I think he's bothered with the same thing Rashi's bothered with. That how could you use the mirrors? Except Rashi puts it in Moshe's mouth. But how could you use the mirrors? Mirrors were used and are being used for material. So Rashi said, so the Ibn Ezra says, the rejection of the mirror is what allowed it to be used for the Mishkan. Okay? The rejection changed its form. It wasn't Gashmius anymore. In other words, sort of like, you know, when you're Mavatal and Avodah Zarah, you annul the Avodah Zarah. Now you could use it. Couldn't use it before. Now you annul it, so you can use it. Use it as a, you know, as a door stand. You can use it as, I don't know, whatever. You know, you can keep the door open with it. Right? Normally, you're not allowed to have any benefit from an Avodah Zarah, right? But if the non-Jew Mavatals the Avodah Zarah, he annuls it. Now you could use it, right? What allowed the mirror to be used that was normally used for material, right? The total rejection of the mirror. Okay, rejecting the Gashmius, and now the women are pure Ruchnius, not the mirror. Okay, the mirror becomes usable because the women are now spiritual. Okay, the rejection is what creates the new, we'll call it the new status of the mirror. Okay, according to Rashi, there was no rejection, and it still gets a new status because of what the mirror was used for. Okay, look at the difference now between Rashi and Ibn Ezra. Very big difference. Okay, according to Ibn Ezra, you have to have actually rejected the mirror to be used. Okay, if a woman came with a mirror and she just had a goodness of heart, you know, she sees her mom giving out a mirror, so she wants to give her mirror too. No, you can't take that mirror. No. Unless you're the women who rejected the mirror, not because you just give it, but you rejected it, right? It doesn't get a new status, right? Whereas according to Rashi, the new status doesn't come from the rejection. To the contrary, it comes from the fact that it was used l'shem shamayim. Okay? So it's two different approaches to not only the text, right? to the text. I mean, the word sovos means, according to Ibn Ezra, going to daven and learn in the Mishkan. The women who gone to daven in the Mishkan, they gave them mirrors. According to Rashi, it's the women who enticed their husbands, right? Who created Savot, who created these armies of children, right? Those are the ones that were going to accept their mirrors, right? Two different pshatim in the text itself, but also two different approaches to the idea. There's two different ideas here being said, right? And the question would be, what's the bigger chiddush? Is the Ibn Ezra the bigger chiddush or the Rashi the bigger chiddush? What would be the bigger chiddush? What would you think?
Ibn Ezra.
Ibn Ezra. Why is that a bigger chiddush?
It's not something we talk about so much, women rejecting the mirrors and studying and davening so much.
You know what? What'd you say?
It's unusual that we talk about women davening and learning so much.
Oh, so in other words, you're right that the chiddush of the Ibn Ezra, the creativity of the Ibn Ezra, you're right, is a bigger chiddush, creativity part. But if we talk about the hashkafa part of it, we say rejecting gives you a new status versus doing something l'shem shamayim tova. It gives you a new status, right? Right? What is it? What would you think is a bigger chiddush in that? I reject material, and now I can use the l'shem shamayim, or I don't reject the material, but I just use the material l'shem shamayim. So again, I want to say, Tova, you are correct that you're saying it's that the Ibn Ezra is more creative in a certain way. He's more creative in a certain way because he had to come up with this whole idea of women davening and women learning. And he says that's sovos. That's why they use the word sovos, because they lined up. What do you line up? You know, what are you lining up? I'm lining up to daven. I'm lining up to learn. That's what people are. By the way, the Ibn Ezra is not so wrong, because if you take a look in Sefer Shmuel, right, it does say, right, in Sefer Shmuel, it does say, I think it's in chapter here. Yeah, it says that Eli's children were terrible people, and Eli heard what his children were doing to all of Israel. Vasher yishkavun et hanoshim hatzovos pesach moed. Hatzovos pesach moed. Now, what were the women lining up for? Again, I'm not going into whether they really slept with them, didn't really sleep, but we'll leave that already for the commentaries, right? But it says hanoshim hatzovos, right? Here, let me get the lashon again. Hatzovos pesach moed. Hatzovos asher tzovu pesach moed. It's mamish, almost the same text, right? Those women definitely, according to the Pashup Shah, the commentators will say they lined up to do some sort of avodah in the Mishkan, meaning not that they were there all the time, but they were lining up to bring a carbon. According to Chazal, they bring karbanis after they gave birth, right? Whatever it may be. But the Ibn Ezra, like you said, the Tova, right? Like you said, Tova, there is a big chiddush here in, we wouldn't think of that in a million years, that these are women lining up to learn and study. But you do see the same expression in Sefer Shmuel, where women actually lined up for something of Kedusha, right? So it's not such a big step. By the way, I just want to tell you something. Ibn Ezra was not alone, but he doesn't have a tendency to quote it. If you go back to Pasuk Chet and you look at the Targum, okay, Vavad yat kiyora nechosha, v'yat besisei, the base, right? Nechosha, b'mechzayan neshaya, right? In the mirrors, Chazon Yeshayahu, right? Mechza, in the mirror of the women, the asan litzala bitrei mishkan zimna. Okay, the women, the asan. Now he has to say it's not in the text in Onkelos. The women who came litzala to skabel tzalo sahon, right? To David. Okay, the Ibn Ezra is not alone in this. Right? These were not women lining up just to give out mirrors. Right? The Ibn Ezra, beautifully describes it. But I do agree, Tova, that it's very creative, the idea, because we never heard of women. It's a chiddush, women davening. This gets like, this is a little bit of a plug, for the feminist movement a little bit, going back to the biblical times, right? But if I ask you in Hashkafa, what is a bigger chiddush? The Ibn Ezra, who says rejecting gives the mirrors a new status, right? Annulling the mirrors by rejecting them gives them, or I don't have to reject them. They have a new status because I use them l'shem shamayim, right? What would you say is a bigger chiddush?
Ibn Ezra still.
Still, you feel? In other words,
Yeah.
rejecting creates a new. By rejecting it, I'm rejecting the gashmias. It gives it ruchnias, or according to Rashi, I don't reject the gashmias, right? But I bring the gashmias up to another level. Correct? By doing it l'shem shamayim, right? So you feel that the Ibn Ezra is a greater chiddush. Why?
This guy doesn't preach asceticism, right?
Okay, you see, so you are coming with sort of the chicken and the egg a little bit, right? No, we have our shkafa of Judaism, right? And the Ibn Ezra is saying something different than the Ashkafa, right? Now, there are times when we do also reject certain gashmias, right? We do reject certain gashmias, but you're right. It's not in the philosophy of Judaism like that. But that's exactly what I mean, Tova. I mean, if you would look at it without any preconceived notion, right? At first sight, what did Moshe Rabbeinu say? Moshe Rabbeinu said, I'm not using the mirror. Wait a minute. If Tova was there, she would have said, Moshe, listen, we don't reject aestheticism. We don't vote for asceticism, right? That's what you would have said to him, right? Right. So Moshe Rabbeinu also thought it was a problem, right? So the chiddush that God gave to Moshe Rabbeinu is exactly what you said, Tova, right? The chiddush is Judaism is not what you think, Moshe, right? It's not what you think, Moshe. Judaism is not about rejecting materialism. It's about bringing materialism to another level. Okay? Now, it's not that the Ibn Ezra necessarily disagreed with that. He just didn't think over here is the source for that. Whereas according to Rashi, when someone asks you, Tova, what is the source that Judaism feels this way? What would you have said the source was? Well, now you have a source. This Rashi is a very good source because Rashi is basically saying that the women did not give up any sort of materialism, right? And they gave them mirrors because they just wanted to give them mirrors. But the mirrors didn't change their status because they didn't reject them. They didn't reject them, right? They just used mirrors that were once in Egypt, used l'shem shamayim. And that already brought them to a different level. So the chiddush over here is that's that God is saying to Moshe Rabbeinu, this is what Judaism is about, right? So normally, we have other sources for this, but clearly this is a source for Rashi to the whole idea. This Chazal is a source to the whole idea that Tova you very much believe in. Okay, this is the source, right? But I'll give you another example. Rashi in Parshas Veschanan quotes the Chazal, "V'aftas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha b'shnei yitzrecha." Love God with but both Yetzirah, the Yetzer Tov, the Yetzer Hara. Of course, the obvious question on Rashi is, okay, I know how to love God with my Yetzer Tov. How do you love God with the Yetzer Hara, right? There's a famous story that they used to say over in Slobodka about Rav Hutner. They said over a very famous story. I never heard it from Rav Hutner, but I heard it from other people. That Rav Hutner, he came to Slobodka as a very young man. My grandfather and Baron Kotler were 15 years old, but Rav Hutner was, I think, right after Bar Mitzvah when he came to Slobodka, which is extremely rare. that they took a guy even 15. And he was a little bit of a, he was a little bit of like a person that, he had chavrusas, but he also had times when he wanted to be alone and learn alone. And there was a time when he used to go into a room and learn. And they didn't like so much that he learned, by himself. So the mashgiach of the yeshiva, not from Nosson Tzvi Finkel, but the mashgiach in the yeshiva, came over to him and said, I see you go into the room. Who are you learning with? So he said, I'm learning with the Yetzer Hara. So he says, what? Your chavrus is the Yetzer Hara? Why don't you learn with the Yetzer Tov? So he says, I learn with the Yetzer Hara because he's a lot smarter than the Yetzer Tov. Right? So Rav Hutner said, he said it very well, the Yetzer Hara is really pretty smart, right? So how do you love God with Yetzer Hara? We know how you don't love God with Yetzer Hara, but how do we know how you love God with Yetzer Hara? But the answer is that this is exactly what it says over here. I have, and Moshe Rabbeinu actually uses the language, according to Chazal, Mipnei Shasunu Yetzer Hara, right? And God doesn't reject that. He doesn't say, no, they didn't use it. They used it for Yetzer Hara, right? And you could actually see them doing something very materialistic, enticing the husbands to have intimacy with them, right? But that's serving God with the Yetzer Hara. I take that Yetzer Hara and I use him for Kedusha. Okay? That's Makadosh, the mirrors. Use him for Kedusha, Makadosh, the mirrors. By the way, there's also another source. Godel Aveira Lishma, mi mitzvah shelo lishma. The Gemara says an unbelievable thing. An Aveira L'Shem Shamayim is greater than a mitzvah shelo l'Shem Shamayim. What is the Aveira, the Gemara says? The Gemara says, Yael and Sisra, right? So, it doesn't say in the text exactly what happened over there, but Chazal, a Medayik, again, we're not going into now the text over there, so we'll just leave it at that, but Chazal, a Medayik from the text, that she actually slept with him. And that way, she tired him out, and then she was able to kill him. Okay? God l'avera l'shma, so that's serving God with the Yetzer Hara. Right? She slept with him. That's definitely the Yetzer Hara, right? So, that's pure Gashmias. But she used it l'shem shamayim to kill him. So that's God l'avera l'shma mitzvah shelo l'shma, right? In other words, these are ideas that we get from different places. But for Rashi, the place is over here. This is it. From the Ibn Ezra, we're really learning something very different. From the Ibn Ezra, we're learning that rejection of material has its place, okay? And maybe Dafka in the Mishkan, the Ibn Ezra would hold that there's no place for, lifting up the Gashmis to Ruchnias. Maybe the Ibn Ezra held, right? We have to speculate, but maybe he held with a Mishkan, with God, there's no room for Gashmis. God is pure Kadosh. Kadoshim tiyu ki kadosh ani Hashem Elokecha. Right? God is pure holiness, and the Mishkan is pure holiness. There's no room in this place for something material, right? And therefore, he found the rejection of materialism would make it okay for the Mishkan, right? But nothing less than that. Nothing less than that. According to Rashi, it's the bigger Chiddush. Wait, in a Mishkan? Okay, I understand in your home, you lift up the Kedusha of your home by taking the Gashmias and bringing it into material, to Ruchnias. So you have a beautiful home, but you invite guests in and you give them meals and stuff. You let them sleep in your home, right? I would think, okay, in a home, but in a Mishkan's pure Ruchnias. How do you do that? That's the tremendous Chiddush of Rashi. That even in a Mishkan, this same rule applies. It's an unbelievable rule, okay? I actually just quoted for you what Rabbi Yaakov says in the Emes Liyaakov on Masechet Avot, right? Rabbi Yaakov, I just wanted to quote the Lashon. I mean, basically, we're all saying the same thing. Tova said it, right? We're not into asceticism. We're into taking the Gashmias and lifting up to Ruchnias. It's not Christianity, right? And that's what Rabbi Yaakov is referring to over here. You could take a look at the whole piece, but Rabbi Yaakov says in Christianity, we know that never the twain shall meet. You have Ruchnias and you have Gashmias, and you don't have both together. There's no synthesis of both. What do I mean? You have the priest and you have the nun. They have nothing to do with the opposite sex. Nothing. They have to be pure ruchnius, right? And the monk was even more so. He not only was like that, but he fasted a lot and stuff like this, right? Then you have the regular Christians, the regular Catholics. They could be pure Gashmis. Doesn't matter. They could be pure Gashmis because that's what they were. They didn't give their lives over to God, right? They're pure Gashmis. If they do an Avera, they go to the priest, who's pure Ruchnius, and they do vidui to the priest, right? They confess, and everything is good again, right? In other words, there's this separation. That's where Rabbi Yaakov really goes on. But Rabbi Yaakov says over here, if you look at page Pei Zayin, towards the bottom, I underlined on the right-hand column, Anachnu ma'aminim, we believe, sheyotzar HaKadosh Baruch Hu et gufa adam, he created the body of the human being, v'achar kach nafach beguf zeh nishmat ruach chaim. And then after that, he blew into a neshama of a spirit of life. That's the neshama. And now they're completely meshed, right? And you can't even recognize where's the guf, where's the neshama, right? Klomar, hagashmius gam hitzricha shetiyasa bofen ruchani. Even the gashmius, it's coming to tell me that the gashmius, it has to be done in a spiritual way, meaning, like we have, meaning you eat, the gashmius you eat to be healthy. Why do you want to be healthy? To serve God better, right? In other words, all our gashmius things have to be done in a way that brings to spirituality. What do? We make a bracha before we eat, right? All these gashmius things we do sheteyasa ofen ruchani, okay? Even though I'm actually doing something physical. And ruchnius could even exist in a way of material, in a material way. You have ruchnius there too. It's material, yet there's ruchnius. That's the Rashi, right? There's material here, there's pure, a woman being involved with her husband in an intimate way, but the ruchaniyut can be there anyway. It can be chal there anyway. It can happen anyway. It can rest in that gashmis. So much so that you could actually use it for the Mishkan. That's the tremendous chiddush of Rashi. I mean, it's Chazal, but that's what Rashi's bringing. So if we need a source, this is the biggest source because it's even for the Mishkan. It's even for Davar Shabbatusha, you're able to use it. Those are the two approaches. And again, I'm going to say, because I said it at the beginning, I don't know what's new to you, and I don't know what's old to you. In other words, you're going to have to give me feedback to know, there's two aspects to this class. There's the one aspect, and it's all dealing with the text, right? The Hashkafa part I'm leaving to you, but it's all dealing with, I just wanted to give you like examples of it, but the Hashkafa part I'm leaving to you. That it's really, how they're learning from the text, a new Yesod. Their Yesod is being learned from the text, right? The message of the text comes at the end. First, we want to know is what were they bothered with the text, right? What was the text? What bothered them in the text? The word is tzovos, right? Why not nashim, right? Why tzovos, right? And what and how are they learning the text, right? In other words, what is tzovos referring back to? Is it referring back to women davening, or is it referring back to women who created tzovos, who created armies, right? This is all textual, basically. Different approaches to the text. And then what comes out is almost the opposite between the two shitot. The Ibn Ezra takes one approach, Rashi takes another, and they're almost opposite approaches. One is you have to reject the Gashmias to create Ruchnias, and the other is you don't have to reject. You dafka don't have to reject it. You just have to lift it to another level, and then you can even use it in the Mishkan. We'll stop here, guys. We'll take it up next week.
Great. Can I ask a quick question?
Sure, please.
Even when Ibn Ezra discusses that here we're rejecting the mirrors, is there is it still based on the idea that the mirrors are actually, let's say, neutral? Because if it was something that was really us or wrong, then even a rejection of that, would we use that tool for Avera in any way in the Mishkan? Or
I think from the Ibn Ezra you're getting that the mirrors are not something negative, because he says this was the custom of the women, and he's not critical of it.
Mhm.
He's not critical of it, right? But maybe it wouldn't be used for a Mishkan. Maybe it would not be used for a Mishkan. For that, you need a rejection. Comes on Rashi and says, sorry, right? So it's really two different approaches to the Mishkan.
Mhm.
But I don't think either of them felt that there's a problem with a woman looking in a mirror. I know there are pshitas in the poskim that say men are not allowed to look in mirrors, right? Because the lotilbash simlat isha, lotilbash gever simlat isha, right? And the question is whether that's included, because we include in simlat isha not just cross-dressing, but acting like a woman. So there's a question of where a man is allowed to look in a mirror or not. So I'm not going to get into that shaila, but it is brought in poskim. And there are poskim that even hold when you put your tefillin on, you shouldn't use a mirror. Very extreme poskim, but they said you shouldn't use a mirror. A lot of people on the back of their tefillin case, they have a mirror, with the box of the tefillin, they have a mirror, they look at it. Some poskim hold you shouldn't even have that, figure out what to do, but you don't need that. But most poskim say you're allowed to do it. And today, men also look in mirrors, so it's not a woman thing anymore, automatically. But there is such a shaila in the poskim. We'll stop here, guys. We'll take it up next week.